Greetings to everyone, certainly Jennifer and to Sarah, those two, and everyone at Studio B. Thank you for showing up for this. And I'm Ty Powers, for those of you who are not familiar with me. And I've been acting as the ethics advisor for Studio B, and I've been working with Jennifer for quite a while now. She's quite an extraordinary woman, and so is Studio B. So I'm really proud to be part of it. And I'm proud to, today in particular, I asked someone who has been a friend and mentor for 25 years to be on the show. So, Philip, welcome. Great to
Glad to
see
be here.
you. Yeah. And so, before we start to carry on here, I want to say a few things about Philip's background, which might be helpful for those of you who don't know him, because it's rather fascinating where he was and what he's come to, especially as a result of where he was. So, Philip was the editor in chief and CEO of Esquire magazine, and he led the turnaround of that magazine back in the 1980s. And after he left this publishing enterprise, and indeed it was an enterprise, he devoted himself to studying and practicing Theravada Buddhism and is now an internationally known teacher of mindfulness meditation. He served as the co-guiding teacher at Spirit Rock Meditation Center from 2010 till 2018. And he's also the president and founder of the Life Balance Institute. And that's the institute that I've been part of through this change and transition training that he had many of us do. So this institute is where he trains individuals and groups in the principles of values-based leadership and living. And those of you who work with me know that one of the first things I have you do is to work out a values chart so you're really clear about what's most important to you, because without that, it's pretty hard to set course, to set sail in the right direction. So his clients come from a diverse cross-section of profit and nonprofit companies. And Philip is the author of several books on our must-read list, Dancing with Life being an extraordinary one. I think my personal favorite is From Chaos to Clarity. And then the most recent book, which he's going to talk a little bit about today, is something called Awakening Through the Nine Bodies, and he'll explain what the nine bodies are. So, with all of that, I bring you Phillip Moffitt, and I'm going to start in maybe by just going back a little bit, Philip, and saying where we started out. So this, as I said, this would be over 25 years ago, and Sarah Powers, my wife, had been invited to the first Yoga Journal conference that she had been invited to. And it was really a big deal. To be invited to that conference and teach there was kind of a highlight of a yoga teacher's life, those many years ago. And she had been on the cover of the magazine. And I think it was right around that month that it was going on. And this is in Colorado in Estes Park. And the family had been on the cover, she and I and Imani. And so as we're driving up to Estes Park, there's one driveway leading into the park where the conference is taking place. And on both sides of the driveway, there are these flags that are triple life size. And on just about every one, I think it was all the flags, this couldn't be true, but this is my memory, were Sarah. And so as we were driving in, there was this sense of, uh-oh, things are about to change. And, as it turned out, after that weekend, Philip was there and he offered a keynote speech. He was writing a column at the time for Yoga Journal magazine. And in this speech, he really brought in a lot of Buddhist themes and the qualities that he had found important to bring to a yogic conference, which was largely Hindu. And I remember running up to him at the end of it and just going, wow, that was really wonderful. Tell me more. And that was really the beginning of our relationship together. And indeed, that weekend did portend a very huge change for me in particular, because at the end of that weekend, we got back from it. We lived in California at the time. We got back from that weekend and there were dozens of invitations, phone calls and emails, inviting Sarah to various places around the country and indeed around the world. And so that on that very Monday, when I kind of went through all those, she said, you know what? You got to drop everything you're doing because I don't know how to handle this. You need to spearhead this for us. And so there was that transition for me, that change for me, rather. The transition, as it turned out, took quite a few years, but the change was immediate, and the response to it was exhilarating. And this is a good change. It was exhilarating and it was exhausting, and it was painstaking to make the transition from what I'd been doing to being the husband of Sarah Powers, among other transitions involved there. So, leading from that to the transition with you, Philip, not only this friendship over the years, but your being the CEO of Esquire at the time of its heyday, and for you to, for whatever reason, and I'm going to ask you what that, we like to call it inciting incident, what that inciting incident at that level of, I've got this where I want it. It's going really well. I'm enjoying everything I'm doing, but something is missing, or some version of that. Carry on with that theme.
Oh, well, I'm glad to be here with all of you. And Ty and I have a very rich friendship. And the only thing wrong with it is we're seldom in the same place at the same time. So when he comes to the trainings, as I do, to become a change and transition strategist, you go through a 5-retreat intensive training program. And that the great thing about that was that Ty and I got to spend time together as he was going through that program. And but we now have a kind of Zoom friendship, like many of you have with your friends right now, but ours has been more constant in that way. So what happened to me was I started out as right after college, getting very interested in what's called Raja Yoga, which is the royal path of yoga, and has a lot of emphasis on meditation. And I sort of stumbled into it. I was not a natural yogi in terms of the asanas, poses, but by a series of circumstances, I found myself doing this, and found myself going to an ashram, and then finding that this was really a path for me in my 20s. So that's what I did in my 20s. And I was back at the ashram when I was 28 and a half years old. And I had this realization that I should leave the world. And I thought, where did this come from? Because I was a young entrepreneur. I'd come from challenging circumstances in my youth, very distrustful of fads of any kind. And so despite all of that, that was a strong feeling. So I went back and told my colleagues that I was going to sell the company, and actually set up to do that. So at age 30, I was going to go off and be some sort of a, not yet a Swami, but Swami in training. And I had a failure of imagination because I got the contracts. I had the memorandum of understanding to sell it and all of that, worked out, all the terms worked out. But then I started going, but now exactly how's my life going to work? And I could not get an imaginative feeling for it. I now teach something called the imaginative possible. And that was the beginning of which I've never told you that, Ty. That was the beginning of my understanding the importance of there arising a moment called the imaginative possible. This will take some time to explain. And so I backed out. And then to sort of justify staying an entrepreneur, I had to do something that had a higher purpose. I didn't make all that. I wasn't making all that much money, but I just was not that concerned about making money. And so the chance came to rescue Esquire, and it was actually not dying, but already dead. But I didn't have any experience with paid magazine circulation, so I didn't know that. So I bought a corpse and didn't know I was buying a corpse. And that ensued a long period of time of getting it turned around. It took me 3.5 years to actually get it on a positive side, and I almost went bankrupt many times, and lots of drama and all that.
It turned out to be a golden corpse.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because what happened was that I really believed that the baby boom generation, the men in the baby boom generation, and a lot of women didn't really have a magazine that spoke to them. I knew exactly who my audience was. I knew their values, everything. And it turned out I was right. And that was what made the difference. I told the editors that were already there when I took over, who were very skeptical of me, that, this is the way people are going to relate to this magazine. 2 years later, in doing focus groups, all these focus groups, they described the magazine, their relationship to the magazine, just as I'd said 2 years earlier, because it was relatedness. There's a relatedness, which turns out to be very useful as a Dharma teacher, by the way. But I didn't understand any of that. I did not have this big picture that it could easily, I could tell this and the way it sounded like that. So anyway, just as the magazine was turning around, I knew that it was going to be a success. It was going to be revived, and nobody else did yet. I'm sitting one night in my apartment in Manhattan on the East Side, editing a manuscript, and I get this sudden feeling, and I get these intuitive knowings which come from nowhere. And this intuitive knowing just started at my feet and physically ran through my body. And the knowing was, I have to leave. And I was going, no, I want to have the fun first. I don't want to leave now. I don't want to leave. Give me some time. And it took me some years, but I left all over again. So what I tried to do at 30, I did at 40. Soon after a few months after my 40th birthday, I walked out the door. And that was yet another big transition in my life. Mm-hmm. So, and I was always interested in changes and transitions because I came from parents who had not graduated from high school and who saw no reason that I would be wanting to go to college or any of that. So that was a big transition. And I just went through one transition after another. I had no experience with the business world, and I became an entrepreneur and on this kind of. So I was always doing this. And so that's how all of this got started. And I walked out the door, much to the surprise of everybody. And there was lots of like, well, has he stolen money? Is he sick or something? And I kept saying to all these reporters from the New Yorker and the New York Times Sunday Magazine, all this, you're missing the story. I'm the first of my generation who's going to do this. All of these people are going to change their lives. And somewhere in this time period, it's a different generation, and they won't stick. They'll change to something else entirely. That's your story. It's a trend story. It's not about me. Nobody wrote it that way. And that was, and what I wanted this inner life experience. That's what I was seeking. Was I wanted a deeper understanding of what is this. What is it that we're living in? What is that? And then my nature, and given my nature, all our natures, how do we live with that? That's what I wanted to understand. Never thought about being a teacher. Never thought about writing books about it. I was just a serious practitioner.
What strikes me about that story, among other things, is something said, move on, and yet it took 10 years. Mm-hmm. Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's something valuable for people to hear about how long it actually takes, even when a declaration of that magnitude is being made inside the body even.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, and that's really worth everybody knowing. And I wanted to make clear that when I was talking about the people we work with, there's a whole team of strategists. You can see all that at skillfulchange.com, if you like, about the strategists and work we do. We work with all kinds of people, all sorts of situations. And I is part of a really talented group of people. I got to cherry pick the first round because there's not that many I choose at a time, and it's really a great group. You'd do well with any of them. But So a change in transition has different stages to it, and we teach these stages to our clients. There's a preliminal, liminal, and all of these different terms that you learn. And but there, you really do go through a series of it's a quadrant movement through change. It can be organizational change, personal change, your career change, your marriage change, where you live, all these different kinds of changes. And from the time that you first get an inkling that, oh, I need to change, it can take years or it can take a few weeks. It all depends on the circumstances. And so, yeah, so I went through a long one of that. And the thing I did is I stayed true to my intuition. I trusted that there was this knowing, and I'm not bragging on me. I'm just saying this is how I tell people to do it. When you feel that, it's not like a fantasy, or it's not like well, I'm just gonna leave all this. It's not got any of that kind of ego reactivity to it. There's some deep knowing, and it can be so quiet. Such a quiet voice. Or sometimes it's banging on you, like it won't let you interact anymore. That happened to me for a while. It was like part of me went on strike. If you're not going to address my interest too, then I'm not going to help you. And that was all an interesting time. But then once we listen to that, then things tend to in time work out, but not easily. Not easy. So well, yeah, go ahead.
No, just on that point. So there must be some listeners that are hearing that and feeling some version of, ambiguity or
Yes.
ambivalence. And so speak to that a little bit, because that's an important thing for people to know how to work with.
Yeah. So you can read in the Dancing with Life book about ambivalence and ambiguity, and you can find it in various places. I have a 5-part talk on ambivalence and ambiguity and ambition. It's 45-minute talks on it, free on the Dharma Wisdom website. And the thing is that we don't know sometimes. We don't know. We just don't know we don't have. We're not clear enough in our values yet as to be able to make a decision. But sometimes that is ambiguity, when we don't have a clear basis for deciding. Ambivalence is when we have mixed feelings, and most people don't know that difference, and they don't distinguish. So you can be suffering from ambiguity, and you're thinking you're suffering from ambivalence, and you're addressing it the wrong way. It's like looking for your car keys under the street light where there's more light, but you dropped them in the dark, of the parking lot. So it's well worthwhile understanding your relationship to both. And you can have very different patterns of ambivalence and ambiguity in different aspects of your life. It's very, very interesting exploration. What I would say that one of the things I have been dedicated to is to empowering others. And I find that much more satisfying than giving someone else a solution, but empowering them to get their own solution. Very, very rewarding. It takes getting used to, because you're not the hero in the same way, but it is so much more satisfying. So I can't begin to describe how much more satisfying. I can talk about that another time.
Yeah. I can certainly relate to that, because I know in the early days, I think for many of us who are on the call too, because there's many teachers on the call, when we're advising people in the early days, that's exactly what we're doing. We're giving advice. And there's a bit of an agenda attached to that. I want to be helpful and useful and so on. And it, in a sense, can begin to disempower the person's own inner sense, the bringing forth of whatever that ambivalent information is, or that, ambiguous recognition. It is so rewarding to ask the right question, and then you see it somehow emerge as an understanding. So
Watching people transform through a change and transition is incredibly rewarding. And those of you who have children, you would have known that and with children. But with children, it's like it never ends. when it's people that you're working with, they do at some point go away. And there's not that total feeling of responsibility. So yeah, but so that's how it happened. The other thing that happened, I was very careful about leaving, and I did what I call cleaning the temple. I did everything I could to be accountable to every person that I felt like I had played an important role in their life. And I didn't want to leave with a mess. So in our endings is our beginning, to quote Mr. Eliot in a slightly different way. And then the other thing I asked myself over and over again, because I did have the cat's meow, as everybody told me I was being so foolish to leave. I wanted to be sure, as best I could, as best I was able, that I was willing to give up getting goodies, getting strokes. I was making really good money. I just hit the peak of making really good money. And I had a lot of influence. I could put something on the cover of Esquire and it would be a nationwide conversation. That's intoxicating and fun. And then status I've never cared much about, but I certainly had status. Nobody who I called, they would call me back, and that just didn't mean much to me, but I did know it was there, and I knew I wasn't going to be there, and I didn't know how I was going to feel once it was gone. And I asked myself that over and over again. And then once I left, I thought I would regret it 40% of the time, and 60% of the time I would be glad. And at least there'd be a little bit more if it wasn't even that clear. But once I left, even though I didn't have any clear thing to step into, I didn't know where I was going to live, what I was going to do, I didn't know anything. I never had a moment's regret. And that remains a mystery to me. On the other hand, as Ty pointed out, since it'd taken me 10 years to do it, maybe I had ripened through, I'd matured through the regret stage. So, but then about changes in this, so you buy a new car, you move to another part of town, you get back in relationship, and it's not everything that it's not the ideal version of it. The ideal version is simply an ideal, and yet we get so caught, we start grasping to the ideal version, how it's supposed to be, what we expect. It's the shoulds. I talk about the shoulds, having a bad case of the shoulds. And I didn't have that to struggle with, but I had years before it became clear what I was going to actually do with my time other than practice, years. Because I wasn't going to say, okay, this is going to be my new life. I was going to wait for it to arise. Because I'd always had like these ideas and these, so I'd always kind of, envisioned and then created what I envisioned. I did not create a vision. I waited. Mm-hmm. That's one of the few things that I get a little bit of credit for. The rest is just good fortune. Mm-hmm. But that I was willing to wait, and I consciously did that. And I had to say no over and over again because I didn't know how to put things together, and I didn't put anything together. That's hard. That's hard. And I don't necessarily recommend that. But sometimes for some of you, particularly since you've been in these teacher roles, it may be right for you. But it's really hard to do that. Most of the clients that I work with, I asked them to take a pause in their life. But then we start to re-envision a life.
Okay, so since many of us on the forum will be involved in a change or transition that didn't arise as a result of some inner calling, and it didn't arise in the context of things going well. It's actually thrust upon them from the outside. The so-called change we didn't ask for, didn't want, would really love to reject. And so the flip side of that, what would you offer to our audience in terms of responding to a change that that comes unwanted?
Yeah. So sometimes those unwanted changes come from a change in our health or the health of someone we're close to, or sometimes it comes from our situation at work, or our spouse comes and says, I really don't want to be married to you anymore, or the person you think you're going to get married to suddenly switches, or that there was this agreement we're going to have kids and now there's no kids. No, the person's not willing to do that. A lot of times the changes are not up to our preference, or they're pandemic induced changes, all of these, their economic collapse changes, lots of different reasons that this happens. We refer to it in this work as three sources of these changes. And the first is age related, because there's a part of the work, the change and transition, is taking a person through adult stages of development. There's a whole science of that I've got my own version of after 35 years. And then the second is when there's situational changes, like from outside. And then the third is like my change, which came from some inner voice in me, some inner awakening. Those are the three catalysts, the rocket boost for change. But when something changes, we often go through, in this preliminal stage, we often go through a lot of uncertainty, denial. We say, okay, I can't live here anymore. I can't work for this company anymore, but we don't do it. I can't teach at this studio anymore because their values have changed. I feel like they're exploiting the student, whatever, but then we don't move. And many people start to condemn themselves for that, for not acting sooner. And that's really not helpful. Mm-hmm. You're just in a struggle. You're in a struggle. And you could even be saying to your best friends and your spouse or whomever, I'm going to change. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it, and then not do it. There's a little stage that I teach the strategist between that point when you are claiming you're going to do it, and then when you actually own the doing of it. And it's a step that we help people through. We help them across that bridge, and it feels very different. You really know when now you're really going to do it. It feels, I've had hundreds and hundreds of people now, so you really know it. And then you're in an uncertainty stage. So there's uncertainty around it. And when it's like the pandemic, we don't know how this is going to end. Are these variants going to come get us again? And so how do you live in a period of liminality where we're in between? It's not ever going to be what it was. It'll be some new version of something, but it's not a new version yet. It's liminal, right? The pandemic is such a good example of that. So that this is not, the new normal will have some sort of thing where there'll be more activity than this, but it won't be the same. So we learn to live with that uncertainty. And that's when so much change can happen internally. Even if you were forced into a change, finding a new job, a different relationship, or not being in relationship, whatever it is, when you're in that stage of, I don't know, and I don't have to know yet. I want to understand better. I want to align myself, my heart, my old coconut, my head thinking, and my intuition of my belly. I want to align these. I want to know this more. I want to give the parts of me that have never gotten their chance to speak and say, well, what they want. And when we're in these changes, it's a beautiful opportunity for that. Usually because there's no way that change is kind of treated something to get through. You don't get without someone giving you permission to do this, you don't know that you can explore in this in-between stage. You don't know, it never occurs to you.
Oh, what's so important about what you're saying right now, Philip, is the fact that this is part of the nature of change and transiting. And if
Absolutely.
people don't give you that information, you think there's something wrong with you in waiting or in.
Yes.
Okay, so a line that I love that you use, that I use a lot, is you can't get there from here.
Yes. Yeah. So you have
And
to
so
wait
you need to wait.
and keep exploring. And new challenges come up that you did not think was part of the change, but then all these new allies come up, new friends come up, new opportunities, all these things change. And different, the exterior and the internal, sometimes you're making an external change, but the real big change is an internal change. Sometimes not. It's all quite beautiful. Anyway, that's this business of moving through. I thought it would take me 2 years before I would have a clear vision of what I would do next. I didn't even get near it at 2 years. I had said, okay, I'll give 3 because, I'm good at counting about these things. So I gave myself a whole extra year. 3 years, nothing. It was the 5th year before I felt any movement towards anything. But I didn't make it up. I didn't say, oh, I want to do something, so I'm just going to do this because I know I'd be good at it. I did not make it up at all. The movement happened on its own. 5 years. That was not pleasant.
So would you say that Dharma had something to do with being able to endure, if you will?
Yes. Some sort of a practice, which I urge people to have a stillness and a movement practice both. And I don't, there's so many different kinds of meditations within the yoga world, and then so many different kinds of meditations within the Buddhist world. I just urge some sort of a meditation practice or contemplative prayer, if that's your background, which is, the contemplative prayer is when you're not saying, oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? That's not contemplative prayer, despite how predominant it's become, in the Christian community now. Not what the Desert Fathers were doing at all. But anyway, be that as it may. So, so you have some sort of you have some sort of practice to steer you through. I found the Dhamma gave me more structure than the yoga world had given me in that way, and so that's what drew me to
I think that's why I was so excited when I ran up to you that day, because I had been involved in the yoga world for I think 10 years prior to that, to meeting you there, and there was something missing. And of course, the yogis out there might be getting angry with us who say, no, you just missed it. It's not missing.
No, that's it. I couldn't find it. I couldn't find it in me. I completely respect the whole yoga tradition. I'm not so wild about enthusiastic about the commercialization of yoga, which really was hard for me to watch, but where people with very little understanding of any inner aspect, became the predominant kind of yoga teacher. That was tough to accept that that's the way the world was going to go, but it did. So in either way or the other, so for me, the Dhamma, because this organization around that we can have a new relationship to our tendency to have greed, wanting mind of all kind, that kind of wanting mind that's always wanting this, wanting that. It's got a restlessness to it, all that we disassociate. That's a kind of sloth and torpor, or the aversive mind that doesn't like this, doesn't like that, is worried about this, all of that. So greed mind, aversive mind, and a mind that's deluded, that just doesn't really show up for itself. I really related to that. And that made sense to me. I understood how to practice with my shortcomings, with that as a frame. And so that doesn't mean that would be a frame for other people, but that was a frame for me. And so it really worked for me. It helped me understand my mind. I discovered in the yoga world that I had access to altered states through samadhi practice, which I did. Anyway, so I wasn't looking for a special experience. I'd had plenty of special experiences. I was looking for a wisdom and a freedom of heart. That's what I was looking for, how to relate to all of this. And I practiced so much for so long. I have an understanding that fits together of this for me, so that I don't find myself being contradictory to myself in my view of things, and how there's every moment of life is a moment of practice. So I don't find myself confused about that. Sometimes I'm confused about, well, but what is skillful here? But I know that I'm practicing, and I know that I wish to be skillful, but I'll be darned if I can tell, well, is doing this more skillful than that or what? And I don't know. And then you live with, you don't know. That's the practice point. You don't know.
So on that note of becoming at one, consistent or congruent inside, I like to call it gathered. It's an experience that we have in meditation as well.
Yeah.
When does one recognize that yet another training is actually fostering this sense of not being good enough or not knowing enough? And that's a big thing in the yoga community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so how would you speak to where that line gets drawn? And I'm going to tie this in also to where you find yourself in your own life, in your developmental chart, and the fact that you're entering middle elderhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you some questions about that too. But
when I started in the Shivananda tradition, and he was a medical doctor in India and became a yogi, and he was the real deal. I never got to meet him, but he was the real deal. And there's not many of those that are the real deal. There's lots of people with information, a small percent of people with knowledge, and very few people that are masters. So masters can live it. Knowledge, information can tell you about it, but they really don't know how to tell you to live it out. And that's the knowledge level. And then the master's level is when they can live it out themselves, and you can feel it in them. But anyway, Shivananda, in one of his books, I think it's Bliss Divine, had this line that said, beyond one is repetition. Beyond one is repetition. This really got under my skin.
I love that. Yeah.
It really got under my, I did not like this line. And my dear friend, Prema from the Yoga Ashram, she would like to bring that up to me all the time. And it always irritated me. And I argued it from this point of view and that point of view. And I'm reasonable at, articulation of arguments. But and finally I ended up embracing it. Yeah, beyond one is repetition. So what is the implication of that? If in fact, all you're doing is that being in a repeat pattern, that's what to look for. If you're just repeating, one example is someone who marries the same person, 2 or 3 times. They just happen to have a different face or something. It's really the same person. They have the same relationship. There's nothing, there's no growth in it. Rather than that repetition, that kind of repeating pattern, and you look for a feeling of onward leading. This is onward leading for me. Something is really different. I feel authentic to myself in a different way. So that becomes the line for me. I don't wish to. Now I'm committed, as part of the value statement, is to being a lifelong learner. I want to be learning. I don't want to get comfortable.
That's the tagline for our institute. Yeah, lifelong learning. But apropos of that point, so one of the things I like to point out around coming back around to something is in reality, isn't it more like an ascending spiral? So you're coming back around and you're meeting the same thing. It's a little more subtle, right? So it's a little more difficult to recognize as the same place,
right?
Same thing. Say more about that, because that's
so I call it circumambulating. Like at the Mahabodhi temple in Bodhgaya, you walk all around the temple with your right shoulder always towards it, and you're spiraling. You can be spiraling up, or you're spiraling deeper into it, because everybody has their own images, and so you feel yourself available to knowing yourself better. You feel a newness. You've been in this place as other times before, in a relationship or in a job situation, but you feel that it is a new relationship to it. It feels new to you. You are new in it. Your understanding is new. Your values are new. The clarity of your values are new. There's something that makes it afresh and a beginning. You're just
Right.
not, you're
Right.
not kind of sleepwalking through.
Right. Although I have had periods in my life where I have been sleepwalking through, and I'm coming around to the very same point on the circle.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about recognizing now that as I mature, there are beats to that maturity. I come back around, but I'm wiser and more mature, but it's there. It's still there.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so I'm meeting it at a different level.
Oh yeah. So there's the way we're constituted we actually can be reconstituted. So we are someone different than we were. But what is much more likely to happen, and happens much more often, is that we dramatically change how we relate to who we are. And people think they have to change who they are. And I've done a lot of that. That's very complex. But actually, it's you can start getting little rewards of changing how you're relating. So like, let's suppose that you get impatient. Your nature is to be impatient. That can completely change, but that is a long haul. But the
Mhm.
way you relate to that impatience, you can start to feel empowered in a very short period of time.
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
not kidding about this. And
Yeah, yeah.
I name periods. People want something, I'll say, I think you can do that. It'll probably take you 3 years, 5 years, something like that. I mean, I will name, people's faces will fall because
Mhm.
I don't have rose colored glasses on, and I'm not Pangloss. I don't consider this the best of possible worlds. This is the world it is with its opposites. So, how you relate to every aspect of your life, you can bring consciousness. You can bring more of the love element into how you're relating to everything. Your shortcomings, your skills, someone else's shortcomings, someone else's great, skills, or attributes, values, whatever. How you relate to them. That consciously relating, and this is where mindfulness, it comes in really well, to really understand mindfulness, whether you're interested in Buddhism or not, but really understanding the Buddhist meaning of mindfulness. It's getting secularized in a way that's taking off uh, many dimensions of just like yoga. Yoga is not the asana practice. The asana as a practice is a means through to this. Mindfulness is a means through to an understanding, to an empowerment.
Do you want to say more about that?
Whatever, ask me something else.
Sort of the difference between the Dharma and mindfulness. About
So the mindfulness, the Buddha's mindfulness is part of what's called the Eightfold Path, and it's got a view in terms of like, what am I trying to do? This is my aspiration. It's got an intention in it. In this very moment, how do I wish to be in this very moment? And the mindfulness is to help us remember to manifest in that way in this very moment, even though the conditions aren't very propitious for living our values. And then it's got a way of wise livelihood, wise speech, and all this, that how we live. The mindfulness is used into an ethical life, and that's not like a big thing, but if you're really choosing to live ethically, it requires mindfulness. But then you got to really be clear about what the values are, because we so justify or rationalize away when we really want something or we're really mad. And then it has practice parts of like learning how do you relate to your mind. That's called wise effort. And then how to collect and unify the mind. That's called samadhi. And then that's part of the mindfulness of it.
so,
Whereas secular mindfulness is being aware in this present moment. And when you're aware in the present moment, you see advantage. So you can see, this person is a fear person. I'm trying to get this group to agree to what I want us to do. And if I create a fear in that person, then they'll go along with me, because I go, if we don't do that, this person is greedy. If I say, then we'll get this. So you can use it for your agenda rather than for your living your life. So secular mindfulness can be ethically based or not, but it takes a real effort for it to be ethically based. It is not inherently ethically based. The person who's most mindful if they're breaking into your house and they're stealing the computer off your kitchen table while you're asleep in the bedroom, they're being very mindful of every step.
Yep, yep.
And in fact, they get a high. We've already seen this from psychologists. One reason that thieves do all of that is they really get a great high because they are getting concentrated and mindful. It's ironic. So there's arguments within Buddhist things about any kind of mindfulness is skillful, it's wholesome. But in the suttas, the Buddhist suttas, there's at least 2 times when he talks about unskillful mindfulness. So everybody argues that. Again, I'm not against secular mindfulness, but for it to be the Buddha's mindfulness, it has to be lodged in a larger context of what you're doing with your life. Otherwise, you're just more mindful. So you see possibilities and you see how to get ahead and beat someone out, right. And your ego then gets to use the mindfulness to glorify itself. That is not the Buddha's mindfulness, glorifying the ego.
Right. Which is why I think it's so important to teach mindfulness in the context of metta or maitri, right? Having that be the backdrop as just one aspect. We can go to the other Brahmaviharas too, but yeah. So I'm realizing here, 50 minutes has gone by, Philip. So we've got 10 minutes left, which means, should I give you the choice of what you'd like to spend that last 10 minutes on? Do you want to go to the 9 bodies? Do you want to talk about your where you are in your journey of change?
Let me say a little bit, if I may, about the 9 bodies. I'm going to just hold up a copy of the book just so that I'm not trying to sell books. And I didn't really, I really tell people, if you want to understand about this map of consciousness, come to a meditation. We have lots of online classes and then we have online retreats. We have one coming up in June for people who've never attended one of these before. I was in India.
Philip, hang on just 1 second there. How would they sign up for that? What's
they can go to the 9 Bodies website, 9bodies.org. And I don't know if I said skillfulchange.org or com. It's skillfulchange.org and 9bodies.org. And
you said .com, but it's .org. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then, or you can go to, for the June retreat, you can go to Spirit Rock's website, Spirit Rock Meditation Center. And so I was in India 18, 20 years ago, and I'd heard about this Swami. His name's Yogi Brahmani. He's got a, rishi, that's really a long thing. I'm not honoring correctly in many ways because our Western world doesn't understand all that. But anyway, so I'd heard that he was a person of knowledge. And so I went to him looking for something to help with the throat chakra. And that was all. And I saw myself in and out of there in 30 minutes. And we went through this interaction. He's in Rishikesh. He's about a quarter of a mile off the Ganga there where all those ashrams are. He's up on a hill, got his own, some number of acres, and but hardly has any students. Very difficult for students. And as I was getting ready to leave, he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go catch an airplane, this afternoon." He says, "No," he says, "You got to stay." And it was one of those moments in our lives, where do you go, okay, this is, what do you do with this?
Right. Am I being manipulated, or is this the real
because
deal?
There's lots of hustlers in that world,
Yeah.
I didn't know this guy. Mm-hmm. Intuitively, I said, I'm going to do it. He said, "You've got to stay. I've got things to teach you." What he wanted to teach me was the teachings of the 9 bodies, which is a teaching of that there are 9 aspects or dimensions or capacities of consciousness. And that if you know these different aspects of consciousness, it changes how you are relating to experience, because you see how different capacities of consciousness come into play and different experiences you're having. I was from the time he started teaching it, I was like, I've had that experience in meditation. Oh, I've had that experience in meditation. Oh, the dots started connecting. I've only had that happen twice with the Venerable Ajahn Sumedho, and then with Yogi Prabhupada. There's only 2 times I've ever had someone be able to like open up a whole different thing for me, because I've been sort of self-guided. And so I started going back again and again, studying with him around this again, very challenging circumstances. But then at one point he said to me, I want you to write the book. And I was going, I don't understand this well enough to write the book. Anyway, all this whole thing, he got his way in the end. And I wrote this book, and I gave all of the information straight as I understood it from him. And then I said, this is how you go apply it in your own dimension, because I make references to the yoga world and the Buddhist world in the book, and because I wanted to serve both communities. And but I only saw it being for people who were really kind of experienced meditation practitioners. And then when I started teaching, very slowly and very reluctantly, it turns out that this has been of incredible value to all of these people that have very little meditation experience. You have to have some meditation experience, because you just don't know how to, you can't, should not be your first meditation retreat. But if you've had even a few meditation retreats, it turns out this is really useful. And again, to take back to your legacy, I have, the way I teach it, I've made it the 9 bodies for insight practice. So we now call it 9 bodies insight. But again, we've got people that have been trained to, are being trained to teach it, that are going to be off, and some already are offering it for yoga, their yoga students. And then, because there's Patanjali references in there, but there's much more reference to what Patanjali is describing that you can actually experience in this. And it turned out to be psychologically healing for people. It turned out to connect them to their heart. It's people have come in and said, this practice has helped me find God again. And all of these different things, none of which I expected. None, 0. And so we've been just struggling with that as best we can. So that's the story. It's a map for consciousness. And it starts with the manifest level of experience, the physical, the vital, which we would call prana in yoga, chi, all of these different, but it's a distinct level of consciousness where there's different perceptions. This is all actually pretty easily to see for yourself that it's all true. It's amazing. He got it as a vision. I even tell you in the book where he was sitting. He sat for 3 days without moving, and he came out of that and he had this vision of this. Yeah. Anyway, it's a whole long story. So then there's the emotion, there's the physical, vital, and emotional level that are manifest in us, that we can see manifest in each other. We can feel others' vitality and all this. Then there's 3 levels of it that are energetic in nature. And then there's 3 dimensions of consciousness that are causal, one of which we can't access. The other 2 we can access through intuition. It's very, it's just, anyway, that's what it is. And you're welcome to explore it or not explore it. There's a series of guided meditations on the 9 Bodies website, so you can go in and get a taste for yourself.
And I highly recommend these for anyone listening.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so that's that. So now what were you asking about me?
Well, so again, since we've got 4 minutes now, I was just asking if there's anything you'd like to share in terms of your own change and transition now at the age that you're finding yourself. So in our developmental chart, the one that you've put together, you're solidly in middle elderhood, and
Yes.
one of the aspects of that is kind of settling into your life, relaxing a bit more,
Yeah.
not being stressed about things, not disengaging.
Right.
Anyway, carry on and just.
So I went. So you can. There's again in this work. If you work with a strategist, that strategist takes you through the stages of adult development, which are pretty. That all this work got started at Yale and so forth. But there's been quite a bit of it now, and there was a whole 120 20 years of earlier work. So, but I have been precocious in terms of elderhood. I went there early, and that turned out to have its own struggles. But then so to me, what I start with is people say, well, are you happy? And I go, what do you mean when you use that word happy? Because I don't tend to use that word because I don't know what it means. Does that mean you get what you want? My strategy seems, not so reliable. And so what do you mean by happy? And what I use is this phrase that I have a kind of well-being, and that the well-being means that I have a sense of being present with myself and with others, and others feel within me a sense of wholeness, that I'm all of me. I'm not trying to ignore parts of my life or anything. A wholeness, that I wish to have a wholeness of life. I wish my mindfulness, my intention of sila, of ethical behavior, to be whole in my life, to be all parts of my life, 24/7. That's wholeness. And unity, to have there be a oneness with all of those, that wholeness, and that oneness have a transcendent quality to it, so that I'm whole around something larger than my ego's needs, because my ego was not, the ego doesn't really belong in the center of life. That's another long teaching. And then that there is within that wholeness and unity, there is a coherence. You feel like when you're coherent to yourself, you don't feel fractured. So many Western people live lives that feel so fractured, some parts cut off, some parts numb. That's not necessary. It's not necessary. You can address that. And then that there is this continuity of one moment to the next. So that when you're on this call, you feel whole and unified, and now you're washing dishes. You feel the same wholeness and unifiedness. You're doing a different task. You've got different goals. All of this. You're different moods, but it feels continuous. There's a there that has a through line to it. That is well-being. That is a sense of being at ease in a life. In this world, we live in a world of duality. We live in a world of duality. The Four Noble Truths, which is Dancing the Life, is about the Four Noble Truths, but I write it for lay life. And the Buddha was creating that for this dual world we live in. And he said it was very fortunate. We were really blessed to have consciousness in living in a dual world, because otherwise it's either too horrible a world or it's too good a world. You need the duality to change, to grow. I'll take his word for it. I don't know. I don't recall being in any heavenly realms. So, I can give witness to the fact that I've seen thousands of people move to a more easeful, wholesome relationship with their experience within themselves, their experience with others, and their experience with the conditions. Really, I mean, this is these practices are like the real deal. I mean, they're not, we're not, see, none of it, it's not a belief. It's not a belief system. It's, in Theravada Buddhism, we call it eipasiko, come see for yourself. It's experience-based, and the experience is a felt sense. It's not theory. It's not theory. It's a felt sense of your experience you build up to knowing. You don't create a theory and then go look to prove it. You have your experience, and this is what you know.
So, what a perfect ending sentence. Mm-hmm. Philip, thank you so much. We could go on for another hour, to be sure, but I think we have a bit of a hard stop here, and I'm certainly, your time is valuable, and I really appreciate that you did this. This is, he doesn't say yes to these things. This is truly a favor to me. So, Philip, thank you so much.
Well, I applaud what you're doing here. I really applaud it, and I wish it all success.
Yeah.
And I miss you, Ty.
Yeah, and I miss you, Philip. And hopefully we're going to remedy that the next couple of months. Well, we have to have a talk.
if any of you show up in anything I'm teaching, introduce yourself and put yourself in context, okay?
Yeah.
All
All right,
right.
everyone. Thank you again. Be well. Love to all.
Thank
From
you.
Malta, good night.